this, and then you can post it on YouTube for anybody else that wants to see it.
All right. Hey, Dan, I don't know if I'm muted.
No, you're not.
Okay, when I went over to her room to look on her computer, there's no Hangouts or anything from you guys, so I don't know. I'm not really sure. I've never had that before.
Jen, are you able to work with her to get connected while we get rolling?
Jen, yeah, Jen will give her a call.
Okay.
Is there a number, Jared, that she can call you at? We've got the school number. Would that be okay to use that one?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, that's
okay,
perfect.
that's fine, Jen.
Alrighty. It is 2 o'clock by my clock.
No way.
I'm just checking with everybody to make sure that the levels are right today because my sign-up sheet was a little bit late.
How's everybody doing today?
What I brought for you was a portion of that.
Yeah, that'll be good.
Okay.
I got it. Yep. I got it last year.
Okay.
Thanks. Ready, everybody? Good afternoon.
All right, hey.
You may have to mute them all, Dan.
I have to mute all of them, don't I? I can hear them.
Okay.
Well, welcome everybody to our Fantastic Adventures Hangout about apples. Agriculture produces the house you live in, the chair you sit on, the clothes you wear, the food you eat, and even the job where you work. A lot of you guys aren't working yet, but it does.
There's a little delay, so his lips will sound different than what you hear.
My name is Dan Toland, and I'll be your host for today for the Farm Bureau Farmtastic Adventures Google Hangout. I want to welcome all of our classrooms here today and the teachers on our Hangout. Mr. Glazer's 5th grade class from Fort Washington Elementary. Can we say hello? There they are. Mr. Pop's 5th grade class from Sandy Valley. Mrs. Best 5th grade class from Buckeye Local.
Go ahead.
And I believe we have Mrs. Adams' 5th grade class from Canal Winchester with us as well. Oh, there they are. Hello. Hey, Rachel Mayer's 4th grade class. How are we doing today?
Hey.
Hi, everybody. We also have with us Michelle Speck. She's one of the hearts above her head here from the Ohio Farm Bureau. She's an organization director there. We have Anita Cook with us from the Cuyahoga County Farm Bureau. She's the one out there in the field. There she is. Well, that's who she's with, our farmer. That's her hand there. She's waving to us. And we have our farmer, Bruce Grayson, who is our apple farmer from Royalton Farms in North Royalton, Ohio. So let's give Farmer Bruce a big welcome and have him tell us a little bit about his orchard and how he grows his apples.
Hello, folks. My name is Bruce Grayson with Royalton Farms. We're located in North Royalton, Ohio. I have a small orchard of 1,000 fruit trees. And I also have a small landscaping company and nursery that helps supply my landscaping company.
So Bruce, how many trees do you have in production here on your acreage?
We have 1,000 apple trees on 6 to 7 acres.
And what type of apples do you grow?
We grow 15 varieties of apples, starting with Prima, Ozark Gold, Galas, Macintosh, Jonathan, Cortland, Empire, Golden Delicious, Red Delicious. We also have Melrose, Mutsus, and Wine Sap.
I see that the trees are kind of bare. Are there any apples being harvested now, or what was the last apple that you harvested?
The last apple we harvested was Melrose. The only apple we have left to harvest is Wine Sap. It's actually, everything's a little early this year, and we were in a hurry to get things down because of some storms that were happening this last week.
When did you start harvesting apples?
Our first apple we pick is Prima. We start picking that at the very end of August, going into the very beginning of September.
How long does it take for an apple tree to produce apples?
Once the tree is planted, it takes anywhere from 3 to 5 years to start producing apples.
How many years does a tree produce apples?
Most trees can go around 30 years. I do have one of my grandfather's original trees here. It is probably about 55 years old to 58 years old.
What about pruning and dormancy and deciduous? Those are 3 words you shared with me earlier.
Deciduous is a term that refers to plants that lose their leaves in come fall going into winter. When they do lose their leaves, they then go dormant. Dormancy is very important to apple trees. It's like a time for them to rest to get ready for next spring. When they are dormant is the best time to prune trees. We start pruning in January. February into March is about when we want to finish. Pruning is very important. If we didn't prune, we would have problems with the trees getting too big. This cut right here was a cut from last winter when I did the pruning here, and this stub is where the cut was made. And this is the new growth from this year. So pruning is a dwarfing process, but it is also a process of it allows the trees to produce more flowers also.
So I understand that you also have a cider press or cider mill. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, when we harvest apples, there's 2 primary things we do with apples. They're determined that they are either a marketable apple that you can eat, or if it has a blemish on it, we can take it and crush the apple and turn it into apple cider.
What type of varieties of apples do you use for cider?
Our policy is to use nothing less than 3 different varieties, and that's usually at the beginning of the season. As the season goes on, more varieties become available, and the more the better. So we like to use as many different varieties as we can. Later on in the season, we may have 8, 9, 10 different varieties of apples in the cider.
Do you grow any other fruits or vegetables?
No, we do not.
So where do you market your apples?
We have a farm market here. The front barn is our market. Our market is open from the end of August into usually into November when we run out of all of our product.
So I think it's now time to take a look at a cider press or making apple cider.
Sure. Who enjoys apple cider, huh? Let me see if I can get the video pulled up. Just a second, and we'll learn about apple cider.
Farmer Bruce, until Dan gets it pulled up, what is your favorite kind of apple?
To be honest with you, I don't know if I have a favorite apple because I eat every variety that when it ripens. I like them all. I tend to like sweeter apples, like Fuji's or Galas. But one of my other favorite apples is Melrose, which is Ohio State apple. It was developed at Ohio State University, and it is a cross between a Jonathan and a Red Delicious. It is a very yummy apple. If you ever have a chance to find them, they're not always in the grocery stores. They're usually at local orchards in their markets. Definitely need to taste one. They're a great apple.
Fantastic. It looks like Dan has the video ready to go.
We are ready. Here we go.
Wait, I'm so nervous.
Yeah, I'm not seeing the video.
Traditions in Ohio on with the seasons. Hot cocoa in the winter.
Really long.
Okay. Good.
Grilling in the summer. And in the fall, there's nothing like a fresh glass of apple cider. Fresh, squeezed juice from apples. That's all cider is. It's not traditional apple juice. That would be like comparing, well, apples to oranges. Traditional store-bought juices contain as little as 3% juice. Cider is pure juice, no sugar or preservatives added. Cider making is a process that begins as a blossom in the early spring and comes to fruition from late summer to early fall during the harvest season. At the Laurelville Fruit Farm in Hocking County, apples have been in the family tree for 3 generations.
In 1911, my grandfather and the local banker started with the idea to raise chickens. The first year, the chickens got killed by the fox. They looked up on the hill and saw an apple tree growing, so they decided to change and go to the apple business. And it's progressed from there. They started to make cider in the mid-40s, and we've since grown to where we are in the cider business today, known to have a clean, nice product. We raise a variety of apples, starting with early apples, going into the late varieties. I was trying to think coming down here, I would guess we're in the range of 20 different varieties of apples we raise. The majority of my apples are red and golden delicious, probably Jonathan. But it changes with the public's demand of what they want.
The Laurelville Fruit Farm might change with the times as new apple breeds are developed, but the cider making process hasn't changed a bit.
The rack and cloth is one of the oldest ways to make cider, the turn of the century or before. Mm-hmm. Every farmer had basically, it wasn't a rack and cloth, but it was, you ground them up, put them in a barrel and in cheesecloth and squeezed them down. The rack and cloth gives you a faster way to make cider. It takes more people. We've stayed with that because of the speed that we can make. This morning you saw us make 1,000 gallons of cider, a little over an hour. We're cleaning up and we're ready to do something else the rest of the day. Our cider does change through the season. Our first cider we make in Labor Day weekend will be much tartar and much more acidic than the cider we make at the end of October, which has a lot sweeter or more mature apples in it. So there's no way to control that because the apple controls that. The customers will say, I see you've got more red delicious in this cider, or I can taste more golden delicious in this cider. So it does change, but we want it to be as consistent as it could be so that the customer is used to what they tasted last week. They'll be happy with what they taste this week. The mainstay of the cider will be red and golden delicious, Jonathan, Wine Saps, and Granny Smith. You want a blend of at least 4 different apples, or I want a blend of at least 4 different apples in my cider, and I want a lot of difference in sweet taste and tart taste to it, so that when they marry together, they kind of taste good in your palate. Our cider tastes so clean each time. It doesn't matter if it's a little tartar or a little sweeter. It's just so much cleaner taste. You just taste like you're drinking a fresh apple.
And the critics agree. The Laurelville Fruit Farm was declared the 2006 Grand Award winner, the Ohio Cider Contest, sponsored by the Ohio Fruit Growers Society.
It's been very rewarding over the year to have people comment on our quality of cider. Publicity is never bad when you win a cider contest in the state. It's a lot of work, and monetary benefits aren't as great as they could be in a factory work or teaching position or something like that. But the rewards you get from the public are worth why you stay in it. We've had some of the same people come back out there, kids, and they say this is just a tradition. Come down in September and October, come to the Laurelville Fruit Company, buy a bag of apples, get a glass of slush, get a gallon of cider, and go back home. It's just an American way. I think it's a fall tradition. This is a time of the year that done all summer, all spring, paid off. Because now they're harvesting them. They are quality, they are clean, they're nice. And if we bring them in and the people bite into them and say, well, I really like that apple, that's what makes your day.
How awesome. Fresh cider. It's a wonderful time of year for cider, and cider is just one of many great things that we get from apples. Let's go back to Farmer Bruce. And Farmer Bruce, can you tell us a little bit about how you make cider? Is that familiar to how you make it?
Basically, yes. We have a rack and cloth system. Ours is much smaller, but it's basically always the same. You wash your apples, grate them out, make sure there aren't any bad apples in the group, because that could spoil your cider. And blending is very important. The formula changes every week depending on what the varieties are you have available. But yes, the cider does get much sweeter later on into the season. We just pressed cider this morning, as a matter of fact. We made about 300 gallons this morning. My father and I have been making it for about 20, 25 years. We've gotten some additional help this year because my dad's getting a lot older, but our friend Bill has been helping us and has been wonderful. He's been doing a great job. The other thing too is cider is very seasonal for us, and we always give people samples if they're willing to try it. But we think we have the best cider around.
Great. And I think now what we've done is we've talked a lot about apples and a lot about ciders. We really want to give the kids a chance to talk here. I'm sure that you guys have lots of questions, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to go around the classrooms. We're going to ask some questions, and we're going to take a question from each classroom in order. Okay, Glazer, Hawk, Blackford, Best, Spladani, Adams, and Mayer. And then we'll go back around for another set of questions. So when you have questions, you can come up and speak loud enough that we can hear you. Don't scream at us too much, but we want to be able to hear you. And for those of you who don't have a microphone with your computers, your teachers can ask the questions there. So in the chat window on the Google Hangout. So I guess we'll turn to Mr. Glazer's class. And let me unmute you, and we'll see if somebody has a question there. Just a second. I'll get you unmuted. Who do we have?
We've been down a little bit. Say Chase.
Chase.
Chase, how are you?
Good.
Good. What question do you have for Farmer Bruce?
What's the most popular apples that you grow?
I would have to say Melrose is one of our top apples. Galas are definitely very popular because they're so sweet and crunchy. But it's probably between, and we also have Honeycrisp, which is a very, very popular apple.
Great question. Thank you. All right. Mr. Hawk's class. Question for us.
I'm Lucas.
Hi, Lucas.
My question is, how long does it take you to make apple cider?
For us, we usually start at about 7:30 in the morning, and we're usually done around 10:30 or 11, and we make around 300 to 350 gallons of cider in that amount of time.
Wow, very cool. Aaron Best, Miss Best class, do we have a question? I think that Aaron is muted. Does she have a speaker?
I know that Aaron did, Mrs. Best did ask, are all apples the same size?
Are all apples?
Not at all. Some apples are much larger than others. We have an apple called Crema. It is an early apple, so it doesn't have as long to grow in size. Some of our other apples, such as Honeycrisp, get very big. We have another variety called Mutsu, which is probably our biggest apple. It can get to be the size of a softball.
Wow, that's
Some of our other varieties, such as Empire, sometimes those are smaller. A lot of it depends on how many apples are on the tree. The more on the tree, actually, the smaller the apple. The less apples on a tree, the larger the apple.
Very good. Miss Adams' class. Who has a question in Miss Adams' class? Let me get you on. Hello. Let me see if we can get the microphone to work there. I think they might be muted there.
Well, while we're waiting for that question, another question would be, this year in the spring, it was very rainy. Does that make any difference when it comes to apples?
Rain can affect the crop in a couple of different ways. When it's very cloudy and rainy for springtime, especially during bloom, we may have less pollination because the honeybees they don't really like coming out and working when it's raining. The other thing about too much rain is you can also get a lot disease problems with too much rain. So sometimes we need to protect the apples a little bit more.
Great. We do have a question from Miss Adams' class. I can see, was that Owen who was sitting there earlier who wanted to ask us a question? I can see that. Hey, buddy, how you doing? Owen asks, how do you sort the apples to determine if they're good or if they're bad?
Well, we bring the apples in large bins out of the orchard, and then we put them on what's called a bin dumper. The apples come onto a conveyor, and then they get washed. They go through what's called a brush washer, water, to get off any other dirt that might be on them, and then they go through a dryer. And then after they go through the dryer and they're cleaned, it's just a process for us we inspect all the apples. We'll usually have a number of people standing around the table, and they look at every apple, and they determine right then and there, is it a good marketable apple for you to eat, or does it have a blemish on it and go into cider? Some apples will rot out in the orchard because, for instance, at the top of the trees, birds might sit at the top of the trees and peck a hole in the apple, and that might happen back in July. So the apple starts to rot. So those apples we throw out right away. We don't even consider those.
Very good. And we have a question from Miss Mayer's class. Who do we have from Miss Mayer's class with us?
I was wondering, when's the last apple harvested?
The last apple we pick is wine sap, and that's going to be harvested right now. We will probably be done picking within the next couple of days. Once again, we don't have a real big orchard, but we have enough that it'll keep somebody busy for a couple of days just picking the wine sap.
Very good. Well, we have, I believe we have somebody from Mrs. Blackford's class who is watching live, I believe, with one of our other classes. Who's with us from Mrs. Blackford's class that has a question? Okay, just a moment. Let me see. There we go. Who are you?
I'm Brandy.
Hi, Brandy. What's your question?
Since what year have you started making apple cider?
Well, we started making apple cider about 29 years ago. We didn't have a cider press at the time, and we went and did something called customized cider pressing, where we went to another cider press, took our apples, they would press the apples, and then we would jug the cider, our own apples, and which became our own cider, and put it into our jugs and bring it back to the market. We did that for a couple of years, and then I determined it would be more feasible for us to get a hold of a cider press and make our own cider. And the advantage being that we can make cider when we need to make the cider. If we're running real low after a busy weekend, we can start pressing on Tuesday. We did that this week. We ran low after having a very busy weekend, and Tuesday morning we were pressing cider again.
Wow. Is there somebody from Mr. Glazer's class again who has a question for us? Can't hear you. What's your name?
I'm Lexi.
Lexi, hi. What's your question?
What made you want to grow and sell apples?
Well, I want to say it might have been a little complicated, but I have a degree in forestry. And when I graduated with that degree, there weren't very many jobs available. So I went into the landscaping business, and I did a number of jobs out that I worked outside. I love being outside. And probably 32 years ago, my father offered me the opportunity to live here on the farm. Nobody in our family ever lived here before. And so I came in, I was younger, I had a lot more energy. We started clearing the land and planting apple trees. And it's a very time-consuming job. You have to love being outside. We're pruning in the wintertime when it's cold and wet. In the summertime, we're mowing grass and spraying trees. And then the most busiest time of the year is in the fall, harvesting the apples. So you really need to love to be outside, and that's probably the #1 reason why I love doing this. The other thing too is you can't go wrong growing apples. They're a wonderful product. They're healthy. They're good for you, and they might even help keep the doctor away too if you eat enough of them.
Another good question, when you plant your apple trees, how many years does it take for you to get apples off of that tree?
Depending on the type of rootstock, the root that comes with the tree, it can take as little as 3 years. It could take up to 5 to 6 years before you start to have fruit.
I also noticed that you have lots of different sizes of trees. What does that represent?
The original apple trees that they planted 100 years ago or even 60, 70 years ago were called standard trees. And they got quite large. They would get 25 feet high. Then they developed another type of tree called the semi-dwarf. What limited the size of the tree was the root. It was a particular root that only allowed that tree to get so high. Those trees will go anywhere from 12 to 18 feet high. And those are the trees that Anita is panning out and looking at right now. Then later on, they developed what was called the dwarf or full dwarf tree. That's probably the most planted type of apple tree today because they only get to be anywhere from 8 to 10 feet high. We love those trees. Half of my orchard is dwarf trees. It's very good for us because it's less climbing on ladders. Ladders can be dangerous. And also, it's just easier to take care of the trees because they're lower to the ground.
Mrs. Adams' class has a question. JR would like to know, what happens if the apples are picked too early?
Not a lot. They just won't be ripe yet. They won't taste as sweet as they should or have a full flavor. Cortland is a tartar apple, and they will just be really hard, and they won't be quite as juicy or taste correct.
You're good. Let's go back to Mr. Hawk's class. Does somebody have a question from Mr. Hawk's class for us?
Say who you are.
I'm
your
Clay.
name?
And what is the difference between the apple cider and apple juice?
Great
Well,
question.
Apple cider is 100% apples. There's no additives. Apple juice many times will not contain as much apple taste or flavor as apple cider.
I see in this bin lots of apples, and some of them have marks on them. Can you share with us what you might do with some of these different apples?
Well, this is a very clean-looking apple. This is what we would call a marketable apple. This is a Red Delicious, and this is an apple that we could clean and just put right in the bag and sell to folks for them to eat. These apples here have apple scab on them. This is called scab. There's really nothing wrong with it. You can eat this apple. I would have no problem washing this apple and just eating it. So this is an apple that we would put into cider. Grind it up and put it into cider. All apples get cleaned before we do anything with them. You may have seen commercials where they show people going up to the apple trees and pulling nice shiny apples off the tree. It doesn't happen that way. This apple doesn't look real shiny right now, but if you wash it and clean it up just a little bit, it looks a lot different than this apple right here. See that? So that's just a clean apple. This is how they come right off the tree. Apples also are not perfect when you're out in the orchard. There's so many of them out there, but some apples just don't get real big. Some apples will get nice and big. Same tree. Some apples have lots of spots on them. Some apples get quite deformed, like this one here does. This probably deformed because of all the apple scab on this part of the apple here. And then other apples will be just absolutely perfect. Some Red Delicious can be very squat. Some apples can be very tall. There's a lot of variation out there, and that's all up to Mother Nature.
Very good. Let's turn to... go ahead.
In my business, I feel that I am just the shepherd of the fruit. Mother Nature does all the main work. She grows the fruit. She grows them. That's why she determines if it's a small apple or a big apple. My job is to protect the apple. That's why we spray, so we don't get a lot of apple scab and get this, but also pruning the tree and helping the tree be very healthy.
Very good. Let's turn to Mrs. Best class. Does somebody have a question for Mrs. Best class?
How many apples do you pick each year?
That changes every year. I get to pick what Mother Nature allows me to have. 3 years ago, everybody in northern Ohio and Michigan, we were hit by very warm weather in March. Then we normally get frost in April. Well, it being so warm, the trees warmed up. The blossoms came out a month early, and then all the blossoms were killed by frost. This happened not only in my orchard, but most of Ohio, the whole state of Michigan, most of Pennsylvania. That was 3 years ago. Last year, we had the largest crop of apples we've ever had. And everybody in the state of Ohio was in the same situation. We had what was called a bumper crop. Then this year, we had more of an average crop. So every year is a little bit different. Once again, it's whatever Mother Nature allows us to have.
Very good. Is there somebody from Miss Mayer's class who has a question?
Yep.
While we're waiting on that question, how do you measure how you sell your apples?
I'm not quite sure if I understand that.
Well, do you sell them by the pound or do you sell them by the quantity?
Well, once again, we are just a small orchard, but last year we harvested 50,000 pounds of apples. I don't like selling apples by the pound because I have a lot of apples to sell. So we sell our apples the way most markets do, and that's by volume. Half peck, half bushel, bushel. A bushel normally weighs around 40 pounds. Half bushel would be 20 pounds. A peck, 10 pounds. And a half peck would be 5 pounds. But we sell it by volume.
Thank you.
Did we have a question from Miss Mayer's class or not?
No.
Okay. Let's go back to Mrs. Blackford's class. Does Mrs. Blackford have a question? Mrs. Blackford's class have a question for us again?
While we're waiting on that question, how do you pick your apples? Do you shake your trees and let the apples fall on the ground and then you pick them up? Or how do you pick them?
Oh no. All apples everywhere are hand-picked. So if you look into this bin here and see all these apples, there's about 700 pounds of apples here. They were all picked by hand. There's no machine that harvests apples. Shaking the tree would be very bad because all the apples would fall on the ground, and chances are they would be bruised when that happened, or just fall into the mud, which isn't a good thing either. For safety reasons, we do not pick up apples that fall on the ground because of potential diseases that they can pick up from feces on the ground from animals. Deer, rabbits, ground woodchucks, things like that. So we do not use ground apples.
Hey. And I think we did have somebody from Mrs. Blackford's class there, a young man in the yellow shirt. What's your name, sir?
Logan.
What is it?
Logan.
Logan, what question do you have for Farmer Bruce?
How long does it take to develop apple cider?
To develop apple cider, Well, it's just a matter of taking the apples, and the apples fall into what's called a grinder. The grinder grinds up the apples, and this morning we ground up around 4,000 pounds of apples. And what happens is when it goes through the grinder, it comes out basically like wet, sloppy mashed potatoes. And it's a little tremendous amount of juice in it. But also the seeds are in there, the skin is in there, and the stem might be in there if the stem is on it. When we, as you saw in the video, they put it in what was called a rack and cloth cider press. The racks just are layers that are firm. They're usually made out of plastic. The cloths actually act as a filter. And the filter, the cloth, keeps all the meat, the solids inside the cloth, and the juice comes through the cloth and comes out as cider. Most orchards will filter their cider 2 to 3 times, not just with the filter, with the cloth, but then they'll have additional filters before it gets bottled.
The byproduct of that you have left, what do you do with that?
That product is called mash. We have no use for that product at all. Within a couple of hours, it stinks. You don't want to go near that pile. We tend to dump it in the field way in the back. The deer don't even want to eat it. The only things that really come to visit that mash are yellow jackets. And within minutes, that mash is loaded with yellow jackets. Some orchards can either sell it or give it to pig farmers. Pig farmers like it. I guess chicken farmers will use it also for chickens. They'll eat it also.
I think I've even heard that dairy farms from time to time will use that. So sometimes there are uses for it.
Yeah,
That.
possible. It is not. It has very little moisture left in it, so it dries up very quickly.
So do you have piles and piles of mash out there in the field?
Well, we're not that big that we have that big of a pile, but we have a pile back there right now. It's pretty big, and by next spring, it practically it disintegrates into nothing. So it just decomposes and goes back into the ground.
Connor from Mrs. Adams' class has a question, and he would like to know, when do you pick the apples?
Well, all apples are picked in the fall in this part of the country. And some apples are picked in July, not very many, and there's a couple of varieties that you can pick in August. September's we start getting busy, and most of our apples are picked at the end of September into and through October. It depends on the varieties of apples that the orchardist is growing. There are varieties such as Granny Smith, we don't grow them, that actually get harvested in November. There's another apple called Pink Lady that is a very, very late apple.
Great. I think we just have a few more minutes for questions, so maybe 2 or 3 more questions here. Mr. Glaze's class, does anybody have a question in Mr. Glaze's class? Oh man, a few hands there. Who do we have?
Good.
I'm Heaven, and I wanted to know, what's the size of the biggest apple?
The biggest apples we grow are Mutsus. They can get to be about the size of a softball. I don't really know what they weigh. I've never tried to do that. We've also had very large Melrose. So every year is different. Some years, if there's not a lot of rain, the apples will be a little bit smaller. If we have a lot of rain during the growing season, they can get bigger also.
Excellent. Does Mr. Hawk's class have a question?
Yes.
While we're waiting for that question, can you tell us how you store your apples to keep them fresh and tasty?
The best way to store apples and our cider is to keep them cold. The colder you keep them, the longer they will last. It has been proven that apples at 50 degrees will last twice as long as the apples at 70 degrees. It has also been proven that apples at 38 degrees will last twice as long as apples at 50 degrees. And it has also been proven that apples at 32 degrees will last twice as long as the apples at 38 degrees. So the colder, the better.
Do you have a cold place to keep them?
We have 2 refrigerators. We call them coolers. I have a small one in my market that is about 12 feet by 12 feet, and that's what we used when we want to bag the apples. We keep smaller amounts up there, and then I have a large cooler in our back processing barn. It's about 36 feet by 16 feet, and it's pretty full right now.
Great. The young gentleman in Mr. Hawk's class is waiting to speak with us. I believe this might be our last question.
How many trees do you guys have on your farm?
Our small farm, we have about 1,000 trees, and we have them on 6 acres. In the apple orchard business, I'm a very, very small farm. I also have a very small family to take care of the small farm. Bigger orchards either have larger families or they just get a lot more help to take care of the orchard.
Great. Well, thank you, Farmer Bruce, for so many good answers. It's time to wrap things up here. Wow, lots of clapping. Very nice. Farm Bureau has provided the classrooms with a wonderful Apple Ag Mag that gives you some really great information about apples. So be sure to take it home and read it and share it with your family. I believe, Michelle, you have a few of those Ag Mags sitting there behind you on the wall there, and I think there's one that says apples right back there behind you. So be sure to take that home and share it. We want to say thank you to all of our teachers, all of our students who participated today, and also Jennifer Barnett, who is not on screen with us, but she did a great job getting everything ready to go today. So we want to say thank you to everybody who made the experience possible, and especially Farmer Bruce. So everybody, let's give Farmer Bruce teachers, let's be sure to go online where you can sign up for more of these Farmtastic adventures. There will be a on November 21st. We'll discuss bees on January 9th, water on March 13th, trails and trees on April 10th, and finally, pizza Baz on May 8th. For more information, you can email us at adventures.hangout@gmail.com. Remember, agriculture produces the house you live in, the chair you sit on, the clothes you wear, the food you eat, and yes, the job where you work. Thanks a lot for joining us today, and have a great day, everybody.
Thank you.
How many of these have you done?